Welcome back to Paranormal Papa Podcast, episode 22, coming to you from Ferocious Feline Studios in Cassopolis, Michigan. We had a 1-week hiatus, guys. I was beyond ill. This new flu strain, it had me flat on my back. In a 48-hour period, I slept for over 36 hours. I was literally sleeping for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time, waking up for like an hour and laying right back down for 4, 5, 6 hours. This thing was kicking my butt. And I'm thankful to my wife and daughter for taking care of me, keeping me hydrated. It's doubtful, in all honesty, that I would even be up and mobile now if it wasn't for them. But we have got a really special podcast this time around. And this, I'll be all honest, complete transparency on this. This one me up. As I was doing this podcast, recording and editing, it literally messed me up beyond all comprehension. As Michael Roser spoke and described some of these interactions, it flooded me with memories from my subconscious of dreams, and I air quote that, dreams that I had starting in 2016 after I came home after being in the coma and everything that happened in that hospital that the doctors and the nurses, of course, referred to as coma psychosis. Their explanation, of course, is, the brain, like a computer, has no input, so it makes up artificial input. And I'll go into more detail after this podcast, or after the main body of the podcast. And I will tell you my own experiences that I had that still to this day, 6.5 years after the final episode, still messes with me, makes me nauseous, and keeps me from sleeping for days at a time. But check out Michael Roser and Wayne as they discuss what's going on.
Here we go. Let's bring him on. The man of the hour, Michael Roser. Hey, brother, how's it going?
What's going on, Wayne and Michelle? Good evening.
Michelle's over here typing away like mad, working on school stuff and the chat. So she's right here.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Yep, from the background. So, Michael, man, what has been going on, dude? I mean, there's been some shakeups in the community. There's some crazy stuff going on. You've had an incredible guest on your show not too long ago, just a couple months ago. We can talk a little bit about that and what you've been doing lately. So what's been going on, man?
Yeah, absolutely, Wayne. Things have been very busy on my end, professionally and personally, which is always a good thing. Lots of positivity on the horizon in terms of direction that I'm very much looking forward towards. Yes, there have been some shakeups, in any sort of paradigm shift. There has to be something that goes out so that something new can come in. And, I don't think I've mentioned this publicly, and, obviously we don't have to go into too much detail, but I'm no longer a part of ArchaeoX, which was, the forays down to Belize at very least, and, what we were doing with that, which is okay. It certainly opens certain creative avenues that I can follow on. And, I'm okay with this decision. Just for those of you who have been waiting to hear about this, have been following me since I started out there, I may come around to talk a little bit about the experiences of being down there that one time that I went, outside of what ArchaeoX began, or became, I should say, because our original intention to go down there was to traverse through the jungles to find ruins, which to some degree we did. So, I mean, that's part of the story we haven't really discussed, but perhaps for another time. But just to mention that that's one of those things that has changed. Before I get into my most recent guest, Dr. Jonathan Reed, I believe is who you're referring to.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I'm making some changes in my life personally, so I just procured a new vehicle, which is fantastic. I love it. It's a Lexus. Yay. I'm moving down to Connecticut in about 2 or 3 weeks, and this will actually be in the hometown that I grew up in, and that's wonderful. It'll be nice apartment, spacious, and it will give me a lot of room, not only in the physical sense to continue doing the work that I do with the shows and the documentaries, but the mental space to do that. So that's something to look forward to. And in addition, I got a dog. So that's what's been happening with me on that end. And of course, people ask, all the time about the absence or the infrequency in which I have gone live and so forth. I would say overall, outside of what I've just mentioned, I'm very particular at this moment about who I'm bringing on and the reasons that I'm doing it that way. A lot of us have understood, even through COVID, there was a surge of interest in podcasts and what was happening. Things really did become saturated at a certain point, and yet there are still many podcasts out there or radio shows that do stand that test of time and shift. And I'm happy to say that I am one of them. But that being said, things do kind of morph in different ways given certain situations, man. Circumstances. So that's that, and all of that's fine. I'll be returning to this in more of a full force fashion very soon. So that's where we are, my friend.
Yeah. Well, like I said, life happens, and there are changes and shakeups that happen, and I think they're for the better. And honestly, you had to make the decision for yourself about the ArchaeoX thing. Thinking of, I want to start with the latest UFO scandal, scam, whatever. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the Lou Elizondo, have you seen this in the picture that he put up? And then it was kind of debunked, and I want to know, since you follow this as much as I do, let me put this up for everybody in case people don't know. And I found this on Instagram, and I don't know. I know there are people that love Lou Elizondo, and there are people that absolutely just hate the guy. And I'm not anywhere in there, it's like, but there's this thing here, and it says our banner's cutting it off, and it says, following Lou Elizondo's recent UFO photo reveal, a member of the UFO community debunked his recent UFO reveal within 24 hours of hard work since the photo was released. I'm not discrediting Luis Elizondo's credibility, but he seriously needs to examine these photos more closely before revealing them to the community as UFO photos, considering he's a former member of the DOD. And the person put the coordinates for you guys to find on Google Maps. And for those of you that are listening to this, I'll try to describe it. So there was a picture that Lou put out there, and he's holding it, saying that this is a photo of a giant disc-shaped UFO. And it was a picture taken by a private pilot at a higher altitude. He took this picture, and what it turns out to be is it's two fields. They're circular fields, and it gives the illusion of one being kind of a translucent disc, but casting a shadow on the ground. And it's a field across a street that's dark that almost mimics the one field on the other side of the street. So it does look like a shadow. And I knew something was going to come of this, and people were going to start having a fit. And so, Michael, what's your take on this, and what do you make of this? Why do we need this sensationalism? It does take away credibility from the whole community. What's your thoughts?
This is incredibly disappointing. A lot of us have followed Lou Elizondo for a very long time, and we already kind of came to an assertion of sort that, put him in the realm of a disinformation agent. And, somebody else who sits in there, Richard Doty, is a fantastic name to bring up under that. Is this the direction we're going with Lou now? I mean, he had put out a book. It was subpar. I mean, the fact of the matter is, all Lou has ever really done is present something in terms of a possibility. He's never really given us anything to follow up on, nothing to research, nothing concrete in any way, shape, or form. And here he comes along with this photograph, which I know damn well he knows what he has, but he has a narrative that he has to follow. And that's the show. That's the dog and pony show here. We're not looking at somebody who's really trying to disseminate truth about UFOs or extraterrestrial life, or in maybe his case, demons. That's not what he's there to do. That's not the intention. But it's certainly brought on people, specifically the public, that this is what it is. Look, this is the best he could produce out of everything that the Pentagon and these privatized organizations have in terms of evidence, and even just pictorial evidence. This is what he decides to bring to the table? After how long? I have a lot of questions when it comes to something like that. And yet at the end of the day, I have to say that this particular expression is incredibly intentional. Look, he gets it from somewhere, right? Just like Corbell gets a lot of material from NAP.
Yes.
There are things going on behind the scenes in terms of those connections and networkings that could have more transparency, but for some reason they don't. Again, another question to ask, especially in approaching something like this that we're speaking on.
Yeah, I hate this because it just sets everything back again.
That's the idea.
Yeah, and then why do it? I mean, is he getting paid? I mean, you speak of this narrative that he's trying to hold. It's like there are UFOs, and he'll tell you, "Oh, we're definitely maybe not alone." There's always this little, right? This little what do you want to call it? Like a little back door out. You know what I'm saying? Well, I said maybe that they're, maybe they're interdimensional, but we're definitely not alone.
Well, whether he gives you that information or not, with that type of statement, he can't be held accountable.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't, unless it's something nefarious, I don't understand the reason for it, and doing it so badly. Like, do you think people are not going to be scouring Google Maps looking for that location and looking to see if there's something there, and they find the exact picture, man? The exact picture.
Yeah, well, I mean, we did this with S4 some time ago before it was scrubbed off the map. I mean, I don't know if that's returned, but I do recall going through all of that research. You ask the question, why even bother to talk about this or present any sort of information like that? There must be some sort of plan that's an overarching plan that we're only getting the hints of in where it's tethered into our reality. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can see beyond that, and perhaps the sky is the limit when it comes to this type of information that certain organizations or factions of government do have. They're going to choke us out. Just to the point where we're still clinging on to life. And that little bit of us that is still there is what's interested in topics like this. And yet we've got this strong arm, right around our neck, allowing only a little bit of that oxygen, a little bit of that information to bleed in. there is a preparation that I can observe, going forward with, perhaps the revelation of extraterrestrial life or terrestrial life that seems to be extraterrestrial, which is the case with Freddie from Dr. Jonathan Reed's case.
Dude, yeah, we got to talk on that.
We'll get into that, believe me. But this is where we sit. I mean, we are still very much under their thumb, and we are powerless in some ways to really obtain the knowledge that they have in terms of this particular field at large. I mean, look, we've been privy to this at the very earliest, in some circles would agree, 1930s, when we started publicly hearing about extraterrestrials or crafts that were reconnaissance, missions that were, in that vein. And yet here we are almost 100 years later, still in the dark. Yes, we have more knowledge and we have personal experiences that are being conveyed, but at the same time, those are being thwarted. And, there are many cases that have ended very badly because somebody just had an experience that they never asked for. So, I'm getting a little off topic in terms of what your original question is, but the point is, there are proponents to that other side of the movement that allows us to have just a little bit for a very long trickle of dissemination, which, God knows what that's actually going to look like for anybody at that given point when we get to that stage. But, there's certainly something happening here that they're taking the time to at least put something out there. And it's not all, oh, no, it's not real. This never happened. This and the other thing. Yeah, that's there too. But it's not completely dismissive. So, yeah, I mean, I guess in the same way, I have a certain question. And obviously the answer must be much deeper than what we can imagine at the moment. Or it isn't. I don't know. See what I did there?
Well, I mean, do you think we're at the point now? I want to say like at the singularity point where we have videos of robots in China, going after their creator. They're showing them off at, I don't know if you saw the recent one, but they have a robot that's on like this miniature like pulley system, and the Chinese engineers are turning it on, and the thing just wigs out and goes after the guy, and they have to shut it down. Are we at that point where you think that maybe, since the government seems to, well, if Lou's a government agent, which I'm assuming that he still is, that now they're flipping it, instead of saying you guys are crazy, yeah, there's something out there. We're going to make Lou and those guys over there, Christopher Mellon, look like the bad guys breaking all this information, but we're really controlling them so we can do what was the conspiracy theory? Was it Project Bluebeam that we were going to be invaded? Was right? Are we getting to that point where we can have robotic grays? They decide that they want to perpetrate some type of a Project Bluebeam. I mean, my conspiratorial self, and then I see it in chat. Rick is like, never trust someone about UFOs who sells books on the topics, right? He says that in chat. I'm not going to agree a whole bunch with that, but maybe a little bit, Depending, right? I mean, you could say the same thing about podcasters, So, but there's got to be an end game for them to be involved. Lou is a counterintelligence guy, so he wants to know what everybody knows about these UFO things, and he's reporting it to somebody. And we can just say it's probably somebody in the DOD. But is this getting into that weird conspiracy type of thing where it's like we could have robotic grays running around here attacking people and being pulled up into a TR-3B. So, I mean, your thought, I mean, it's all speculation, but my God, they've been talking about this stuff for 50 years, a fake invasion, Yeah.
Well, curiously enough, I think it was on the last show I did with Dr. Jonathan Reed, he had mentioned that Freddie had said that we may see a false flag invasion very soon. And this came across, according to him, less as a message and more as a warning. Now, again, as you mentioned, we've been talking about something like this for a very long time. If there is a reality to it, then there may be one day where that does actually manifest. And, when we have the advent of AI, the way that we are seeing that progress now, some of those videos that I've seen, especially the one that you mentioned where the robot kind of flips out, some of those were mechanical errors or something had actually glitched within the item itself rather than AI taking over, although there is that aspect to some of those videos as well. Now, is this just simple misbehaving or misdirection from that intelligence, or is it something more intentional? I don't think we have the quantification to kind of focus on that yet. We have ideas because we're instilling a piece of our consciousness into AI and its development inherently, because it is our creation. Whether AI itself existed somewhere in some sort of fashion prior to our discovery to it, could be argued. But that being said, we are, at least what it looks like, is creating a different form of consciousness that can be classified as a life form. So if we're at the point where we're doing that now, and obviously this is done through technology, we also understand that, bringing up the Greys, they have a cyborgish or android sort of
How many
element to
times?
their person, and yet they're biological in nature as well. But, this could be that bridge that sort of, this whole period is a liaison between what we didn't know and what we're going to know. And they're trying to sort of fill in the gaps, again, doing this very softly, because perhaps there are people out there in the world who are not ready for a full disclosure. And I mean, I look at the tumult that happens over in Russia and Ukraine and all these different places, all across the planet. There's still upheaval, and it's violent. And it doesn't necessarily have to be physically violent. It can be verbally violent. It can be politically violent. It can be, any sort of measure like that under the umbrella of this. And on one hand, we do understand the power that we're developing. And on the other hand, we're still the child in the sandbox playing around with whatever we could create. And it's still empirical. So, again, going back to this whole idea of a narrative that is being pushed upon us, I think, again, there is something in terms of getting ready for a major paradigm shift. And yes, a false flag invasion would absolutely do that. But, of course, within the moniker, within that name, false flag, it's not going to be the true extraterrestrials that we think we see. And those extraterrestrials, from my understanding, have to let this happen to a certain degree, if that's going to be the case. They would never do that themselves. Not that there aren't races out there that have tried, but most of that activity has ceased in a certain sense. And yet it may be placated because that type of energy or those beings actually work with us for their own intention while we have our intention. And again, I can bring this back to many of the Black projects where we allegedly worked with these different races. We didn't really care what they had in mind in terms of vision, but it was the vice versa for them. They just worked together to a common goal to find out what was going on or what they could see. Again, very empirical. And that is sort of the label, I think, for this time period right now is that empirical sense of exploration and experimentation. And yet we still have a certain understanding, or I guess a supposition about what we may see come of this, and yet we really don't know.
What do you think the paradigm shift means, or what is the paradigm shift going to be? And even more so, what is your thoughts? What if that paradigm shift is based on a false narrative? Like
what
this.
About. Right.
Yeah. So what would the paradigm be if it was real, like if it was a correct narrative versus the paradigm being a false narrative?
So essentially, the whole action of a false flag invasion, that's the manipulation, that's the deception. And if that's put on by marionettes, if you will, political marionettes or governmental or what have you, they're doing it for their own reason to maintain a certain power that they already feel that they're losing control of. And with the more information that we have when it comes to the extended versions of reality, I'll put it that way, the more powerful we become within that knowledge and then act on that and grow as a result. This is something you can't really truncate. I mean, you can do it for a certain period of time. We've seen this in many civilizations in the past, but eventually this has to push through, because this may be a larger movement of energy that we're all a part of, and yet still one little small toe of that whole body, and yet we have to come along as well. So there's this fervent hope, I think, that they'll be able to still control us the way that they have, keep the economy the way it is, because this is the system that they've always wanted. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that's what we've seen. But again, there has to come a time where that does change. So going into integration of different life forms, okay, I mean, even talking about this paradigm shift, we're looking at AI and that technology, that changes everything. So I'll give you another example of what we're up against right now. So recently I've been reading some articles on some research that had been done into different cell manipulation, and this goes all the way from the very first cells in the human body to the skin, and they're already in the process of understanding how to put much more longevity to the human body. So the proposed idea is that by 2050, we will have the option perhaps to live twice as long as we live now with this cell regeneration, I would say it is. It's a step back from that, but for the sake of conversation. And of course, this prospect is wild and crazy in and of itself. I mean, they talk about the word immortality. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you could live forever, but maybe it does. And that's sort of something that I've come across, because it hasn't really been, at least expressed to the public, what they've found with this, but they've told us as much as I'm telling you now, which is, again, incredibly fantastic. By 2060, this technology will be available to people like you and I. For 10 years, between 2050, 2060, it's really only going to be available to the elites, the same way that perhaps flying cars in some avenues are, only afforded by those who can afford it. But by 2060, the common person will have the option to undergo this type of treatment and extend their life. Now, a lot of people will find quite a bit of problem with this, and a lot of it lays in morality. It lays in what we're already familiar with, a natural course of what is. But we're in a stage where we understand that we can manipulate reality on a larger scale, and we may be able to take out certain things that we always thought would be there. I mean, we take out this equation of death, that we can decide when we die and how the body goes. Well, work on taxes next. And then you take that phrase out of the English language, you know what I mean? But that's the thing. All these things that we took for certainty, all right, a certain certainty, even the earth spinning at the speed that it does, well, it's been slowed up by the dam over in China. These things, the very foundation of what we know and understand, has been has been shaken. And we're sort of reeling and yet still going forward. And the progress keeps, lapping over us like waves, and we're sort of just, keeping ourselves afloat going through. But this is where we all find ourselves right now, And, if there's an integration of extraterrestrial knowledge or some sort of presence, again, this changes everything down to the very fundamental way that a person thinks and views the world. So, within that, it would just inherently have to change on a very large level with this disseminated information.
Well, like, look at the, the CRISPR technology.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, as I'm attacked by my cat.
Did you see the CRISPR spider that spins with glowing red silk?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Stuff like
There's
this.
That. There's the introduction of dire wolf DNA back into the wolf, bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a full they're not full dire wolves, but there's that genetics being added back in to those pups that I don't think they're pups anymore. They've been around for a while that we didn't know about, that they were, bringing them. And now you have things like Ozempic now and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So start adding all that together. And then you have AI, you have robots. I mean, are we going to eventually our consciousness become like Avatar? Are we going to see? My concern is that these entities are helping us get to this point, whatever these entities are, so that these robots that we're building and we're thinking we're going to have all this great control, they're going to be able to manifest and put their consciousness inside these robots through AI.
You know, even if that is the case, I don't know what that would actually end up looking like. I mean, there seems to be some sort of dependency or synergistic existence between extraterrestrial life, the way we understand it and are familiar with, and human beings and the Earth itself. Now, if that's just an interest as, the Earth has some sort of habitation for these individuals, then perhaps that's one of the reasons that they want to preserve things. But if, when we're talking about different theories here, we're, somewhat of an offspring to these certain races. They have obviously an investment in us and our growth and development. Now, with Freddie, when Dr. Jonathan Reed came upon him in the woods, and this was obviously, to what we saw, a chance meeting, and has now been confirmed from that side that, yeah, this wasn't planned. I mean, this was no sort of divine intervention. He was just out there. But the question is, what was he doing? Well, he was researching. Apparently, he's some sort of scientist or, works with natural habitat, and he was out there gathering data for whatever he was working on. And this goes directly in line with, again, keeping in mind that the Earth is conscious, it is a life form, and, obviously is reflected in every living being that resides in and on it. So there's much more that goes into the interpretation, I believe, when extraterrestrials may or may not decide to intervene or, come into our consciousness in a very physical way. I had an experience recently where, I've shared a lot of these paranormal experiences, and I'm very familiar with what these look like, even repeating in certain factions. An experience I had was with an extraterrestrial that I saw with my own eyes sitting in my room. And, if you want to go into that, we can, but I will tell you, I was absolutely shocked. And my realization was that we had been having a conversation for quite some time while I was doing another activity on my waking consciousness. And at that moment that I saw him, and there were 3 others that were with him that I can describe as well, it was all done telepathically and just was not in the linear timeline that I'm familiar with. Now, again, conceptually, we can always talk about that, but to experience it, my jaw was on the floor for a good 10 minutes before I could move or say anything to myself. I just really had no idea what I just experienced because it looked exactly like what I thought it was, and yet this was not familiar to me. So imagine that en masse, and how would that look to introduce, something that has always been there and yet has been intentionally kept a secret. Again, now we talk about the dissolving of trust well beyond what we're already experiencing when it comes to our governments. And it really comes down to people at the end of the day. And it's people that run the government, and it's people who are underneath the government. So, this would just be an entirely different way of life. And we would immediately, at the drop of a hat, have to change that. And it's not even a choice at that point. You literally have to go with the flow.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we got a couple different roads we can go here. We can talk more about that encounter, that personal encounter you had there, and we can talk about that. Or we can go into your interview and talking and meeting Dr. Jonathan Reed. So
they are related.
Yeah, so why don't we get some background on that conversation, what happened, how old you were, and things like that with that encounter in your room. And then, okay, go for
like 2 months ago. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. I thought this was a while ago. All right, let's hear it. Or should we do Dr. Jonathan Reed's thing first, because then it might make your encounter a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to go this way. So you had on an amazing guest. This was about 2.5 months ago or so. And you call it the case of Dr. Jonathan Reed, smoking gun evidence. And yes. I started, after I watched him on your show, I started going down, and you had two interviews with him?
Yes.
One was like 2 hours long. One was a little over 2 hours long. And boy, did I start going down the rabbit hole of what happened. So if you can you lead us into what his story is, high level. And everybody go to Michael's channel and check out these interviews. He's got tons of stuff on there. He's been doing this a while, and he's a fantastic researcher. But Dr. Jonathan Reed.
Yeah.
Deep breath.
It's probably the most comprehensive case I've ever come across. And, this is, oh, sorry, but by the way, I just want to apologize for the glasses, but I got this light right in my eye. Can't see anything. I wanted to talk to Dr. Jonathan Reed maybe 2 years ago, and I became aware that he was going on Dr. J Radio live show. And so I talked to Dr. J and I said, I'd love to interview him, afterwards. And he said, well, I'm not really sure what his intention is after, working with me. He's, obviously goes well back to the Art Bell days. And so there was this, instant connection, with Dr. J and Jonathan. He said he's getting older, and maybe he's not going to be interested in doing another interview, but I'll put the word in for you. All right, thank you. I mean, that's really all you can do in that circumstance.
Yeah.
So they did 2 interviews together. Unbelievably good. Dr. J knows his case inside and out, and I would certainly look to him as somewhat of an expert on this case outside of Jonathan Reed himself. But I'm quickly gaining tread on this too. I've become very good friends with Dr. Jonathan Reed. I speak to him a couple times a week at least, and we go into all sorts of things. Now, one thing people don't understand about this case, which I'll give an overview of just a moment, this is ongoing. This isn't done. This started back in 1996, and it continues on to this day. And a lot of that has to do with visitations from that extraterrestrial, which is not the turn of events that I had expected, going into the interview. And I was not aware that it was actually something that still had leg. And so the curious thing is, everybody wants to know why. Why is this extraterrestrial still coming back to, Jonathan and so forth? There are a multitude of reasons, and a lot of it is to help this information go forward. And, I got to tell you that there are times where, I've been warned that he could come into my reality. Now, I took this with a grain of salt because, again, fantastic. Why me? I think all sorts of things. And yet, going into that story in a bit, he did visit me. And it's just one of those things that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. And I didn't want to talk about it publicly until I, got a chance to bring this up to Jonathan, which I did before the last interview. And that was the first time that I had spoken about this, because even now I'm still in awe as to what happened. And it although Freddie has come back to me since, I'd say twice, it wasn't exactly the same. But he was there. It's hard to wrap my head around. Let's put it that way. So long story short, what ended up happening with Dr. Jonathan Reed back in 1996 in Washington State, he was walking his dog Susie in the woods. And, it was a beautiful afternoon, and the dog goes up over a ridge, and all of a sudden Jonathan hears the dog being harmed. So he bolts up over, sees what he thinks is, a 3-foot humanoid child or small person, whatever he thought at that moment, ripping his dog from the jaw all the way to the backbone. And it happened in a second. So reactionary as he was, he picked up a stick and slapped this thing on the back of the head, putting in incredible contusion in the back that was actually bleeding. And there were skull fragments that you can see because he was videoing a lot of this after the fact. He had a camera with him in some way, shape, or form. Maybe he was doing this. He was a photographer as an interest as well. So, I mean, it makes sense why he might be carrying something like this. But even back then, not everybody had a camera. So it was just fortuitous that he was able to, film this and document it the way that he did. And we see the obelisk that's there. And there's some thought that goes into that. Maybe that was part of the hub of what, this extraterrestrial was working on, in this particular remote area of the woods. Certainly a lot of thought goes into this. I mean, the thing is, we can take any element of this case and just expound and continue to expound upon it, because there's so much information and so much experience and actual physical evidence that it becomes overwhelming, and you have to take small bites. So as he's looking down at this extraterrestrial that he now realizes this is what it looks like, it's some sort of gray. He doesn't feel well. He ends up getting very sick. It takes him about an hour or so to recover, where he can just take a small sip of water. He wraps the body in it was an aluminum camping sheet of sort. I forget what it's called. And brings us back
like a thermal
yes,
sheet.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Thank you. So he brings it back to the truck, intent on bringing it home. One of the most saddening things about this is that, he had mentioned that through all of this experience, he saw his dog die and, still went through the process of what was going on. It was only at the moment he got back to his truck, looked in the rearview mirror and saw this body wrapped up in the back and looked over at the passenger seat that he realized his dog was gone. And that man loved his dog. We've had conversations about animals, and this guy is just, I couldn't tell you enough good things on terms of his altruism when it comes to animals. So, even today, he's still mourning that animal. And so the story goes that he brings it back to the house and he films it doing an autopsy. He was a medical doctor and had the know-how to do this. Got bone grafts, skin grafts, and blood that he then sent off to university to have analyzed. And it was. And he came back to talk to the person that was going to give him the information. They asked him where he got it from. This is nothing like anything we've seen before. And a day later, that person was shot in their office. Okay, that's perhaps number one. There are 14 people that are dead that had surrounded Jonathan, helped him some fashion, had a part of this case, and he himself has been shot 3 times. So there's a reason that these people are coming after him and others that work with him, that, they want to keep this under wraps. Now, the fact of the matter is, while he has this at home, he's bringing over friends, family, constituents, co-workers just to view this body. So there were many, many, many witnesses to this happening.
He saved the body, right?
What's that?
He saved the body.
Well, he put it in the freezer thinking that this was going to just, kind of keep it. But apparently, in one way, shape, or form, it actually helped the entity heal itself. So it was, 3 days later, I think, he heard an awful scream from the basement when this thing had sat up and punched the top off of the hunting freezer that he had it in, screaming. And there's actually an audio recording that was played on Coast to Coast with Art Bell of this sound, because it happened, I think it was more than once. So, at this point, Jonathan realizes that it's not dead and tries to communicate with it in a verbal sense. He realizes this isn't working. And the sound that Freddy, the extraterrestrial that we've named, is making these sort of chirps and pops, that are audible. Again, there's complete disconnect in terms of the communication. So what ends up happening is that Freddy starts to try to talk to him telepathically, and Jonathan becomes incredibly overwhelmed. So Freddy dials it back a little bit, and next thing you know, with a little bit of time, they start understanding little bits of what they're trying to convey to each other telepathically. And the way that Jonathan had mentioned this is that it was sent in pictures, and those pictures had feelings. And if you were to kind of look at something within that mental image, there was an association of thought with that would convey something back to that person who was having the experience. So perhaps that's what telepathy is like. It's, it's more of a picture than we use words to communicate. So I think he had this being for 8 or so days. It might have been a little bit longer, but long story short, there was a point where it popped the freezer door again and left. And the way that Jonathan said he found it was that there were these little wet footsteps that were going towards the wall and then just disappeared into the wall. So somehow he was gone. He was not part of that reality at the moment and went back home to wherever he was. Now, that is, for most people, where the story ends. And then we have to then talk about how his house was raided a couple days later, and everything that he had was upturned or stolen. And this has happened multiple times. And, he's been able to preserve some of the evidence. But the most significant piece, outside of the DNA sequencing, which I believe had 40 chromosomes, in which 8 or 9 were from porpoises and sea turtles, but still had human chromosomes and DNA for the rest of that.
Oh, wow.
He had a link that we call the Odessa. And everybody wants to see this thing, and I understand why. Because he went on national television, I believe it was up in Canada, and demonstrated this thing and what it could do. So essentially, he puts it on. You see this big orb of white light come from his chest. He's clearly in pain. It's a very uncomfortable experience. And all of a sudden, he disappears out of reality. Well, on live television without cuts, he then returns. It looks like a magic trick, but it isn't. And he had done this many, many times. So I asked him, where do you go? And he said, I've gone many places. And so we got into some of the detail of that. And what I can tell you at the moment is that, the first time he found himself in front of these superior beings in some other place. Maybe, it was definitely in an enclosure. Perhaps, I was thinking like a Roman cathedral. I was just imagining that in the way he was telling it. But these beings were, some 20, 30 feet tall, whatever it was. And they were just columns of light that would communicate telepathically. Very, very high consciousness beings. And they are Freddy's superiors. But there's just love from these beings. And for one reason or another, Jonathan is in the thick and thin of this. Now, there were times we talked about how to decide whether you're actually in a real state at that point. It's not meditation, it's not dream. And we've come to those conclusions through certain mechanisms that Jonathan would employ to verify that he was in a physical place. So that's curious. Now, another place that he has gone with that Odessa and actually returned to several times. By the way, he doesn't choose where to go. The superiors, those who are the ones operating this on the person who puts it on. It's not the person driving, it's the superiors. He goes back to this place, which is a limbo between life and, I'm sorry, it's more of, how do I describe this? It's sort of like a setting point where souls who have just lived a life come to kind of hang out, relax, share experiences with each other, and then, eventually go on into the next incarnation. But it's the way he described it was like being in a medieval castle and looking out the window, and there's just a field, or an entire span of all these little white globules, which are human souls. And they're all interacting, bouncing off each other, sharing those stories. It really helped me understand that there is no separation between that side and our physical reality. And it's actually a lot easier to get there than we think. Now, I don't necessarily have a blueprint, but again, there's certain things I'm not mentioning at this time that verify that even further for me personally, that I think, in time people will be hearing about because, we're trying to bring this story into even a larger light than it's been in the past. And that's neither here nor there. We're in talks about something progressive that way. But yeah, I mean, again, having all of this physical evidence, the two of which I mentioned, there's a whole litany of things to get into with this. It's the most compelling case that I've ever seen. Yeah.
Yeah. Does he have some of that evidence still? And does he have it like hidden away since he's been raided and things like that? Does he have like a fail safe out there in case something does happen?
Yes to the fail safe. That generally has to do with the Odessa link. Okay. He's put about 8 or 9 people between him and that link, and this is for a certain reason. But yes, I did ask him about that. If something had happened, is there a hand to pick it up and continue on? He said yes. And that's what I'll say for now. Okay. He does have some of the evidence that we're talking about, but not much of it, because you have to keep in mind that through his story and all of this upheaval in his life, he was homeless before he was approached by a group of people that apparently deal with folks who are just like him, and they protect him. They gave him a place to live. They gave him money to eat. And so he's got the light side of humanity working for him and the darker side trying to work against him. And he's stuck in the middle of all of this.
Yeah.
And even to this day, he's very careful, with every step he makes. He always has to watch over his shoulder. There are people, even in the time that I've been talking with him, that have been assaulted. And these are people on his team. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but just suffice to say, this is still happening. And obviously I have to keep this in mind with my involvement too. And yet there's a part of me that really wants to go forward with this, because I think people need to know about this. And I don't want this to fizzle out into the background under the din of negativity that has been pushed against the story.
Now, if I remember correctly, in his video, he came across the craft.
So that was the obelisk.
Yeah.
Obelisk. I always say the word wrong, but that's what that was. It was too small to be a craft the way that we would think about it conventionally. In fact, when he touched it, he felt like he was pulled into this, which was a much larger space, perhaps the size of a football field, but had no idea where he was and kind of pulled himself out. And that was the experience. It could be for storage. It could be a pathway. It could be for some sort of communication, dissemination of data. There's all sorts of thoughts as to what it actually could have been. But I don't think it was a spacecraft. I think it was tethered there. You couldn't move it if you wanted to, floating 3-4 feet off the ground. So I don't know. I don't know what that was.
So what's the name of the wristband or the arm thing that allows him to move?
The Odessa.
The Odessa. Do you think that is how what we consider UFOs and aliens, this is how these things are coming into our reality through using that kind of a technology? And you said you've run into Freddy, right? I mean, you are now connected to this Freddy thing. How'd you guys come up with Freddy?
I don't know how he came up with that name, but it seems to fit for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible that is what they're doing, using an Odessa link like that to come in and out of our reality. But at the same time, they're in some other time or timeline of sort, because, Freddie has said, we are you from the future. We are what you develop and evolve into. We're just light years away from where you are in your development now. So, kind of wrap your head around that for a moment. You have something from the future coming back to this present moment saying, hey, this is what you develop into. And yet we're still sitting here linear in our thinking. They may be much more versatile in the way that they can move and go about things. Now, human beings within their geometry have what is known as a Merkaba. And the Merkaba is two tetrahedrons that are facing opposed. And once you go into the right meditation, you can spin these in the directions that they need to go. And the whole point of this is for you to utilize this within the third dimension. So it is possible to use that to go into the fourth dimension, but that's not what it's there for. It's really for, many other things outside of what I'm mentioning here. But, if you wanted to teleport from, Detroit to Massachusetts, you could do that in the blink of an eye. But that's the limitation. That's the ceiling of what it's supposed to do. So is the Odessa link something similar? Or is it the main means of the way in which they travel? I'm not sure.
I'm really fascinated with the communication that he had or was trying to learn. Can you describe that again? And the only reason I'm asking is because of the communication that I had when Michelle and I went under that black triangle.
You mean the telepathic element?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it was emotion. The only way I could describe it was that it was instant terror that I never felt before, and the impressions of get away, you don't belong here, get away. And it was the emotional damage, right? It's the I don't know if they were necessarily words or words that came out of the emotion. I cannot. And when you were just talking about that, it made me think of what I experienced, and then later became, a few months later, became ill with the Graves' disease and the fried thyroid.
Yeah.
So I'm more interested in more information on that. What do you know?
There's a possibility that, within whatever these extraterrestrials or beings are utilizing in terms of transportation or going into a certain environment has a defensive element about it. And obviously the suit was what killed Susie, his dog. It wasn't Freddy. It was a literal defense mechanism that just ignited as soon as there was a threat and acted. So as we understand that some of these crafts that we see, have a mechanical aspect about it, they're also biological in nature as well, very much like, perhaps the alien grays. And there's a possibility that that might be a defense mechanism that goes along with the craft. Now, that's not to say that any inhabitants of that craft have no idea that you're there underneath. They may know that, but they have that set in a certain way. And this is usually done through frequency. Even ourselves, we played with, lower frequencies that, push certain physicality or break up riots. They cause some sort of consequence in a physical faction, and we're again using sound. So to me, that's probably the most likely scenario, is that there's something defensive about the technology that they have and how they utilize it. And yet we don't really know who you came up against. The TR-3B purportedly is ours. So if that's the case, and government factions have not only garnered the technology, but also have the know-how in certain ways to utilize that technology to the way that, the original designers would, then, again, we're talking about two separate worlds that, human beings live in, and yet we're still here in the same physical space. But yeah, the, communication, I find is different for everybody, but at the same time, there are consistencies that can be observed. And again, having the emotions behind whatever images are pushed out, again, being more conveying than anything that could be spoken about, through word. Having those emotions of fear or elation, depending on the experience, again, there are similarities that go into this, and yet the actual experiences themselves are individually different.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I definitely get the feel that, and I hate saying the feel, just everything in my mind logically says that that's no way that craft that Michelle and I experienced was ours. There's no way. There's just, to throw a term back to our buddy Jared, our governments like to play king ding-a-ling, right, with their weapon systems and stuff. And they love showing that stuff off. And they love, hey, China, if you mess with us, here comes our TR-3B, and they make no bones about it. Once they're out of the production thing, I mean, look at the B-21 Spirit, now we've got the F-47 that launches multiple drones controlled by AI to help one fighter become multiple fighters. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't, could it be?
Though.
What's that?
That's conventional though.
Right.
So, I mean, we're not talking about, the upfront military factions that we're aware of. We're, certainly speaking about what's behind the curtain there. And, Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, all these privatized organizations have all this technology. Anything that's been reconnaissance in any fashion goes to these companies. And again, they don't have to tell you about it. They don't have to tell the governments about it. They have no law dictating that they need to bring out any of this information or what they're going to do with what they have. So I would imagine that they figured out how to back engineer some of this stuff and then utilize them, in the same way that, again, the original inhabitants would.
Well, isn't that Immaculate Constellation? Wasn't that the backwards engineering program?
From my understanding, yes, that was one of it. Yes.
I just find this so bizarre because, man, when you were explaining how the thing was trying to communicate with them, and I would love to talk to Dr. Reed about this. What I just, if I could figure out what that was all about. I mean, how can you be 150 feet over a major city at an intersection of a major road and an interstate at 2:30 in the morning, and you're going to tell me that I don't belong there when you're in a huge 300-foot black, weird looking kind of camouflage, something going on there, almost like Predator-ish from the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to tell me I don't belong there?
It doesn't sound like something an extraterrestrial, the way I would know them to be, to do. That sounds like something we would do.
Yeah, but we live there. You don't fly your stupid craft there. You know? But, okay, so how'd you get wrapped up in now dealing one-on-one with Freddie? And what have your experiences been like?
Well, this all began after the first show I did with Dr. Jonathan, and, I get backstage with him and Dr. J, and, we're kind of shooting it back and forth very quickly. In the beginning of this conversation, he says, "Hey, Michael, I want to let you know something." I said, "Yes." He said, "There are two things that you need to watch out for." I said, "Okay." He said, "The first is that you could be hurt. Somebody could come after you, so keep your eye out." And, paraphrasing what he said, there is an element of danger in this knowledge. I said, "Okay, I understand that." He said, "The second is that Freddie has visited other people that have interviewed me in the past for one reason or another, and there's a possibility he might come see you." And again, as I mentioned, that's when I took it with a large grain of salt. Said, "Okay,
Sure.
that's fine. No problem. I'm open to that," as you would imagine. So about 2 to 3 weeks later, came home from work, and what I usually do, on nights that I'm working double shifts, I come back late. I call up Rich from Goof On. And I say, "Hey, let's go play some mini golf on the VR Oculus," and we get into it. So that night we did it. We played about 3 or 4 games, and I wasn't paying attention to the power, and the Oculus died. So I said, darn. So I take off the thing, I put it on my shelf, and I turn around, and in the chair that I'm sitting in right now, I see Freddie. And to the left of me are 3 other beings that are, the best way I can describe it is that they were made of ribbon. They kind of look like stick figures, no head or anything. It's just sort of this tentacle-esque type creature, and they're floating about 2 or 3 feet off the ground. Now, when I turn my attention towards those, I don't feel a direct communication. I feel that they have consciousness. I can feel the consciousness that they're alive. Maybe they're observers, maybe they're escorts. I don't know what they are, but they're with him and non-communicative the way that apparently I was with Freddie. Because when I turn my attention to him, this all happens in an instant, really. I heard in my head, "Okay, good. Well, now we're done." And it was just like that. And that's when I realized we had had a whole conversation about something philosophical, deeply spiritual, and have no knowledge or recollection of this. Now, this has actually been confirmed by Dr. Jonathan Reed to whatever degree you want to subscribe, wherein on one of the visits that he saw Freddie in a recent sense, Freddie had said, "I went and visited him. I was vetting him. He's a very old soul. He's very genuine. He's very sincere." And I think Freddie cares about this case as much as Dr. Jonathan Reed does, and the impact it has on the human race. I really think he does. And maybe it's not just him. Maybe it's his superiors. And this is, a line of that evolution. So that happened. And like I said, I was just floored. Didn't know how to process it. Was not something I was familiar with. These beings disappeared right in front of me as soon as I had a lock on and everything I just described had occurred. Boom, they were gone. And it wasn't like I felt a shift in the air the way that I have with spirits that have come to me, whether they're human or, something else. There's always this like pressure that, comes about the environment. And when they leave, the presence is gone. That sort of disseminates in one way, shape, or form, or dissipates. I'm sorry. And it wasn't like that. There was like a higher level of frequency that these individuals came in on and were here for. I don't really know how else to describe it. But, in subsequent visits, I felt him. He was back in my room here, and he was standing up this time. He was just the size I thought he would be, about 3.5 feet tall. And out of the corner of my eye, I could kind of see the outline shadow of him, but I could feel his presence. I was very aware of what he felt like at that point. And then there was a time after that where he came to me in a dream. And again, we had another conversation that I woke up saying, I know I sat with him, but I have no idea what we talked about. But his presence is unmistakable. The way that perhaps somebody who is in tune with their own guides can feel them around when they lower their vibration to get a little bit closer to us in terms of whatever reason. Let me just put it this way, okay? I've been stuck for the better part about 4.5, 5 years. And that really has to do with, my personal situations, dealing with my living situation, my personal life, all that. Been very stagnant. And I, many times thought to myself, how the hell am I going to get out of this? It takes money to move. It takes fortitude to do X, Y, Z, this, that, the other thing. I just don't see the affordance in my life. I'm not getting these opportunities. And I was trying to do certain things to open those doors, and it wasn't working out. Now, call it coincidence, call it synchronicity, call it completely unattached. I don't know. But after I had that first experience with Freddie, all of a sudden, fantastic, positive things began to come my way. And yes, I still have to do the work to obtain those, but they're now within reach. And my entire life shifted in about a month and a half's time. Everything that I had wanted to move forward with, I can do now. And that wasn't the case before I started talking to Jonathan and saw Freddie. So is there a correlation? I don't know. But I have to sit back and say there might be, because prior to that, I was in this state of, again, stagnation and just couldn't figure out how to go forward.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I firmly believe that Freddie is a positive influence in my life in this way. And of course, Dr. Jonathan Reed would say something similar on his personal end, but yet there are repercussions for that type of relationship and connectivity, obviously in the physical sense, with people trying to come back and, throw the story on its head and, obviously harm other people as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Catch-22s here.
Wow. How many encounters have you had with this Freddie character now?
3.
And you don't remember what it was that you guys were able to talk about?
No, and I feel like, maybe I don't need to know it yet. I'm just saying that that's a feeling that I get. Not that that's my preference. I'd love to know all of it. But it's tucked in my subconscious somewhere. And I did talk to somebody about possibly going under hypnosis to retrieve some of that if it was possible. But I have not followed up on that yet. But that's probably the way I'm going to find that out. If I go that way.
So of all of the things that you've done thus far, would you say that this interview with Dr. Reed and these encounters have been the most impactful to you?
Yes. Yes, I would. And it was not in my intention to see it that way. It wasn't in my realm of thought in terms of how this would affect things. I saw the video years ago, and my memory of that is I found the video and I looked at it and heard this guy freaking out, saw the body. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Like, this seems legitimate, but these days you never know. So I kind of put it on the back burner and only later realized, some years later, that it was Dr. Jonathan Reed's video. So this might have been in the works well before I even had the opportunity to know who was involved with this. And I've actually had experiences like this prior to with Eric Medhus from Channeling Eric and his mother, who, I had found her readings and her website back in like 2014. And I went through everything. And I thought, man, this is really interesting. And I later found out after I became friends with her and did interviews that, number one, her son, Eric, is one of my guardian angels. And he was the one who brought me that way initially to kind of prime me for what was going to happen in terms of my career after that, in terms of the esoteric fields. So this isn't a pattern that I haven't seen before. It's just always fascinating and amazing to witness this and then realize there may be a correlation, and that overall this kind of means you're on the right path, as an individual.
Dude, this is mind-blowing that from an interview you are now getting the personal experiences, the connection. I don't know how I would personally. I'm sitting here thinking, how would I handle something like that? And I honestly don't know. I mean, it was hard enough for us to deal with the triangular experience. We didn't talk about it for a couple of days, and then it popped in our heads, hey, start a Facebook group and see if anybody else has seen anything. 3 years after we started that, we started our podcast because we had like almost 4,000 people that joined our group within those couple years, telling us all kinds of stuff. And it just went from there. And I'm curious to talk to Dr. Reed. I would love to have him come on the show and talk to him. But I'm also a little standoffish because of where that whatever the triangular craft that was hovering there was, where we have come to from that experience. What would that next experience be? And what does your empirical scientific brain tell you, man? Because I know you're very scientific and you think about these things from an empirical scientific method way when you do your research and stuff. Is there a battle happening within yourself, the dichotomy of the paranormal? It's not even a dichotomy. It's probably more than that. Paranormal, spiritual, alien, interdimensional beings. Bro, how do you filter this, man? With all the things you've done. All of that.
They all sit in different compartmentalized categories within my mind, if you will, and I'm able to revisit that like I speak different languages. But yet there's this crossover and a conflict when, I have a right-brained experience, something that I can convey very anecdotally, and then there's scientific evidence to back that up. That's where I even have trouble putting it together. But you have to, because it's there in front of you. And, as an intelligent being, as we are, we have to make those deductions based on what we're presented. And if some of that presentation is personal experience, it's really, really difficult to deny. And of course, raises a whole bunch of other questions within oneself. And then of course, going into, the population at large. So, for me, I mean, my experience has been difficult to integrate that with this specific experience. Prior to this, UFOs, extraterrestrials might sit in the same category as the paranormal for me in terms of that conversation. They both are sort of intangible, unlikely to, cross paths, but there's a possibility. For me, the paranormal was more apparent than extraterrestrials, even though I'd always wanted to, excuse me, have an experience like this. I mean, I've seen UFOs, and we've talked about this before, but never had a personal interaction with any extraterrestrial. And the information that Jonathan has given me in terms of his experience, it's larger than anything that I think I may ever see again in my lifetime. And why this is so important that we have people to continue this story on. And it's not always just about the research. It's about, again, the conveyance of that and what has happened. But, if something were to happen on Jonathan's end today, I don't think that my relationship with Freddie would stop. I think it would be just as strong, if not stronger, in terms of whatever was happening with that shift. Because, I look at Jonathan like a brother, and he has expressed the same to me. That we're very close, and we became very close very quickly. To me, that's unnatural in the sense that, you meet somebody, you get to know them. There's something much deeper there, perhaps at the soul level of recognition, where we're now working together. And that's something that we had to understand that we may have been put together this way intentionally. And maybe this came before our incarnation. This is part of the story. I don't know exactly, but we can observe that there's something there on that level. So, I have to take that in mind too when I bring the science into it. But again, because Jonathan has so much physical evidence that is undeniable, that's where the strain really comes, in terms of, really understanding this story. And then again, for me personally, how I relate to it.
Well, T-Bone in chat asked a great question, and my mind was going right to that. Where do cryptids fit in? What has any of your thoughts on the cryptid field changed now because of this and this Odessa and these beings that are coming and going and looking like orbs and ribbons? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I asked Jonathan, within his talks with Freddie and his superiors, if, he ever brought up cryptids or Bigfoot specifically. And he said, not really. I haven't. He said, but there are many different forms of consciousness that come in and out of this reality. My thought on the cryptid end of things, I mean, that's exactly what it is. Now, I don't necessarily believe that they have a certain technology, for example, like Bigfoot or Dover Demon or, Mothman. They have a biological way of moving in and out of this frequency. And perhaps that's more natural than it isn't. Maybe we're the ones who are limited in that type of travel, whereas, it's a more universal or ubiquitous sort of way of going
out.
out.
The ability, maybe?
Maybe we lost it. Maybe we never really had it. And it's not that we couldn't garner it, but that was by design. Sexual energy was something that we were not apparently designed for. And through our own knowledge and garnering of that knowledge, we evolved into that and then could procreate. But that wasn't the original intention and how we were created in the first place. So, what makes this experiment here on Earth so enticing is that apparently it's never been done this way before. Now, that's outside of this being the 7th iteration of this creation, wherein we're all starting from square one again, moving back up, blow ourselves up, let's start again. This is the 7th time, and I've heard this from many different sources that are not connected. And I've made the connections, within that. So I, again, think there's something very significant about our evolution. And, that word empirical really stands at the forefront because nobody really knows what's going to happen. It's sort of, we take it day by day. We have ideas if we continue on this trajectory where it will take us, or we go on this path where we're going to go. But even the extraterrestrials themselves are not privy to the clairvoyance of what is going to become our future within this timeline, which is a curious thought considering, Freddie says, we are you from the future. Well, apparently there's one timeline where we do work that way. And if we understand timelines at all, we're jumping on different timelines every moment. With every action that we make collectively, we're creating a different timeline, or we're going on one that perhaps exists already. So,
right.
With that, it becomes very complex and, for many, very overwhelming to think. And that's fine. It's the same way we can't necessarily experience infinity, but we can conceptualize it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, fascinating. This is it's just mind blowing, dude. And I can't imagine like dealing with those experiences the way, I mean, you interview the guy and this whole different realm just opens up, and nothing like that's ever happened before, has it? Like this?
I don't know. I mean, we might not know because that person who would tell you is dead. Look at Phil Schneider. I mean, there are a bunch of different people who come out and wound up dead because they just were talking about what they needed to. And again, that brings in other people as well. So, there's a lot of thought as to why that's happening and, what organization is really behind it. More questions, to ask as we go forward.
Yeah. Hey, Lou, can you answer these questions?
I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning without smirking and lying to you. So I don't know. What is it that I had for breakfast? Well, I sat down and I was cooking few things. I looked out the window, there was a deer, and then I came back and I sat and I started putting it on the plate, and next thing you know, the door rang. So I got up and it was time to go to work, but I shoved the last of it down my throat. So what did you have for breakfast, dude?
I never said I had breakfast.
No, not you. I'm saying that was Lou talking, right?
Right,
oh, yeah,
right,
okay, yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the point. You know what I mean? It's always a roundabout thing. You never go straight for the answer. And that's, again, we get the nothing burger. That's the term that, Lou sits between two buns here.
You're right. Or we get a picture of two fields across the street from each other held up,
It's great for tilling in crops.
Jeez. Oh my God. But then we have Dr. Jonathan Reed's case. And it's, see, the fact that not everybody knows about this case tells me that it's probably like 99.9% credible. I mean, it's always the little guy out there, it's always the small sliver that is legit, and then everything else around it. What is it? The UFO reports they talked about, 90% of these things turned out to be weather balloons and aircraft, misidentification and weather phenomenon. And, that's it. And then you sit there and you go, but what about the other 10%? You don't need 10% of 400 reports, You need one. That's all you need is one. It's like, I don't know, man. It just...
Well, honest to God, that's it. You just need one that's verified. Then everything else becomes null and void. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
And in that, once you verify something like that, you know what to look for. So you can, contrast that against whatever experience you're up against, whether it's shared or your own, and you can make a better determination about what you're looking at. I mean, half the time, people look up in the sky in an optimistic fashion and they see something, but they don't know what they're looking at. So, for example, my mother, had sent me a picture, I don't know, it was maybe a few months ago, 4 months ago, whatever it was, and was on her morning walk and said, oh, look, I found these lights in the sky. So she sends me the picture. I look at them. It's just a long string of lights.
Oh, no.
And, she wasn't saying it was anything, but she thought it was anomalous. She didn't know what she was looking at. I said, Mom, that's Starlink. She goes, oh, but it's something that simple. And, you have iridium flare satellites. You have space junk popping around. You have to know what in God's name you're looking at, or at least be able to deduce what it isn't versus what it is. But most people don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many cases of people filming a light moving across the nighttime sky, and then it just bloop, disappears, and they're like, oh my God, it's gone. No, it's just no longer reflecting the sunlight.
That's right.
The angle of the orbit and where the planet is. I mean, there's certain things. This story is amazing.
Ourselves, the more that we go into these cases and give it the proper analysis, the better off we're going to be at actually determining what's in front of us. And that goes for everyone. That's, it's wonderful that the news has been talking about UFOs and the capacity that they have over the last, 4 or 5 years. It gets people aware that there is something to look for. And, I understand that a lot of people want to see this happen and want full disclosure. Maybe that's what we're up against. Maybe it isn't. But at the same time, we're getting some disclosure here.
Yeah. Yep. In small little chunks. All right, Michael. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been a great conversation. Any last minute things you want to drop on us, man? Because the whole Freddy thing is like massive. That's just major, man.
Yeah, I mean, it has changed my life in the way I see things in an extraordinary way that I could never have imagined and would never have expected. Now, one thing I'll say is that there are very few times I come on in a public sense and I say, with outright conviction, I believe this happened. And, there was something about Jonathan's case that I felt confident in saying that, and yet I kind of, would play the fence a little bit, but at the same time, intuitively, I felt that this was the real deal. But now that I've actually experienced something peripherally or maybe even more directly with this case, and it's now my experience, I can't deny it. Even if I wanted to, I can't. The only way, even if he came back tomorrow and said, hey, listen, it's been a good run. I was lying about everything. I'm a great storyteller. I don't know that I could believe him, because I saw Freddie sitting in this freaking pool and the three other dudes next to him. I saw that. So this is different. And I'd love
you can't throw away your experiences.
What was it?
You can't throw away your experiences.
No, but you're locked in once you have it. I mean, you could question your life and you're not scratching your head, but at the end of the day, I experienced something. That's what you come to the conclusion of.
Yep.
So, we'll see what happens going forward. Of course, I'll keep everybody updated as I am appropriated to. And, I'm looking forward to sharing much more information about this case and my private conversations with Jonathan, which he's given me the go-ahead to share in whatever capacity that I like. But, I'm also very discriminate in terms of certain things that I still feel are very sensitive. So not that I would hold anything back that Jonathan would want me to express, but maybe there's something between us that we had discussed that's of a more sensitive nature that I may just hold on for a moment and then see how things go. And again, I don't want to put anybody in danger, including myself, my family, anybody around me. So I need to do this artfully and walk the line in a way that I've never really had to do before. Look, when I've talked to the government about, certain things, I had to call up, maybe the Department of Revenue or, something along those lines. They get on the phone and they know who I am. I've mentioned this before. I've had several experiences where, I'm expecting to give them my name and my social and date of birth, all this stuff. They say, oh, no, we know who you are. I say, well, how do you know who I am? You're the ghost guy, or, you work with the paranormal, you're into esoterics. Like, how do you know this? We're the government. We know that. So it's not like I haven't been watched and didn't have a knowledge of that in the past, but this is a different story altogether.
Yeah. Welcome back to the studio. I'd like to thank Michael and Wayne for going over these details and these experiences. As I said in the beginning, they brought up a deluge of subconscious memories that I had buried. As many of you know, back in July of 2016, I went into diabetic shock. I actually died twice in a matter of an hour, and they brought me back. And as I was fading the third time, they induced a medical coma that I was in for about a week and a half. And when I came out of the coma, the wife asked me, did you hear me talking to you? Did you feel me touching you? Rubbing your feet, rubbing your legs. That's not the memories that I had. I had very strange locations. I even remember waking during the coma in a strange room. It was all white, and I was on a sling type bed, suspended by white cables from the ceiling. There was a small tabletop radio disc player playing music directly across from me. I kept trying to get up and slide off this sling, and it would just swing back and forth, and the nurses would come running in and tell me, no, I must lay there. When I came out of the coma, I asked doctors and nurses about that, and of course they would tell me that there was no room, no beds, no suspended sling type deal anywhere in the hospital, that it was a coma psychosis. It was the brain creating memories because it had no input. But that being the case, when I came home for almost 2.5 years, I would randomly wake in the middle of the night, and I would see myself on a platform across the room, and there would be 4 or 5 of these bright light type shapes, no eyes, no discernible mouth, and they were just touching me. And when I would start to set up in the bed, it would all vanish. This occurred over and over and over again. As I worked on this episode of the podcast, the memories of these figures, these strange, light, ribbony beings, come flooding back. The memory of seeing me laying on this platform, this suspended platform, the way that they would almost look shocked when I would start to set up in bed, and then everything would vanish. I remember these beings being 6, 7, well, 7.5 to 8 foot tall, as their heads were about as high as our doorway to our bathroom. It's just off our bedroom. And, I have talked to people who specialize in abduction cases. I have talked to psychics. I have even been hypnotized. And they all concur that these are actual memories that I hold in my head. And it's very frightening not knowing the truth. So as Michael Satin described his interactions with Freddie and the other beings in his home, it really, really affected me. And I'm happy to have this podcast done and over with, and being posted today, so I can put these memories back in the past and not have to think about them anymore. At least I hope. But again, I would like to thank Wayne and Michael for going through these strange situations. And I'd like to remind you that Paranormal Papa Podcast, Paranormal Papa Investigations operates without any support or sponsorship. If you'd like to support Paranormal Papa Podcast, Paranormal Papa Investigations, you can do so at our double encrypted PayPal link. Of course, it is double encrypted for your safety and protection as well as my own. That is www.paypal.me/MrHistory2020. Of course, there is a link down in the description. If you would like to sponsor Paranormal Papa Podcast, Paranormal Papa Investigations, there's a lot of needs to running an investigative team and trying to become the top paranormal investigator in the Midwest. You can contact us at midwestparahistoricsociety at gmail.com, and we can discuss needs, desires, etc., etc. for the channel, the investigations, and the podcast. This has been Paranormal Papa Podcast, episode 22, coming to you from Ferocious Feline Studios in Cassopolis, Michigan. Until next week, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you, God love you, we do. And happy hunting.